Mara Velasquez loved September mornings when the orchard smelled of dew-slicked apples and her hives simmered with the citrusy hum of contented bees. She kept 20 boxes of carniolan honeybees along the east fence of Bonnet Hill orchards, and every dawn began the same way. Veil down, smoker lit, bees inspected, notes jotted in a weather-stained notebook. The owners considered Mara half farmhand and half alchemist, because the honey she coaxed from her hives lent the cider a floral sweetness no one could quite duplicate. This year's harvest contest mattered more than any in memory. Cider sales upstate had flatlined, and the state tourism board promised a distribution contract to whichever orchard took first place. If Bonnet Hill won, they could afford new trellises, a refrigerated mill, maybe even a second beekeeper, so Mara could finish her neglected master's thesis. If they lost, they would remain a pretty but struggling patch of land, sandwiched between larger, better-funded estates. The morning of judging dawned clear and cool. Tents popped up along the main lane like toadstools, each shading a different brew. Golden, amber, rose-tinged, cloudy, filtered, aged in whiskey barrels, or fresh-pressed that very week. Children chased each other with caramel apples. Retirees sampled every free toothpick of cheese in sight. Somewhere a bluegrass banjo twanged. Mara carried 3 gleaming bottles of Bonnet Hill's honey-infused cider to the judging pavilion. The wax seals bore tiny imprints of a bee, a subtle brag. She nodded to the other competitors while pretending not to study them. Ivy Barkley of Barkley Orchards stood behind 5 stoneware jugs, guarded as if they contained state secrets. Pete Farrow leaned against a post, shirt untucked, easy confidence masking the rumor that his trees had produced half their usual yield. Old Mr. Templeton dozed on a stool, but his grandson Dylan kept glancing around with skittish energy, as though afraid someone would taste the farm's legendary bourbon-aged batch before the official pour. And near the back hovered Callista Quinlan, newcomer from the coast, whose late-season purchase of Larkspur Orchard had sparked gossip. She wore a forest green coat even though the day was warming, and clutched a small cooler as though it were heavy with more than cider. At exactly 10, contest chair Mabel Truitt tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome our head judge, Mr. Hollis Grant, sommelier and nationally certified pommelier." Grant strode onto the platform, neat beard flecked with silver, clipboard under his arm. He exchanged polite nods with Mabel and faced the semicircle of tables. "Let's begin," he said, and uncorked the first entry. For the next hour he swirled, sniffed, sipped, spat, and scribbled. Photographers snapped pictures, while volunteers carried away emptied glasses. Everything proceeded with the clockwork grace the festival committee prized. Until the bee. No one saw where it came from, only that it arrowed through the sunlit air and landed on Grant's neck just above the collar. A reflexive swat, a yelp, and the bee tumbled dead to the grass. Grant pressed a finger to the reddening welt and tried to laugh it off. Within minutes his complexion turned as cloudy as unfiltered cider. "Are you allergic?" Mabel asked, alarm rising. "Not normally," he muttered. "Just need water." He reached for a carafe, took a swallow and froze, eyes bulging. The glass slipped from his hand. He staggered, crashed against a table, and crumpled to the ground among shattered bottles and foaming cider. Screams erupted. Someone called 911. Mara pushed through the crowd and knelt beside him. She'd taken first aid courses required for pesticide handling. She recognized anaphylaxis, but something else too. The faint almond marzipan odor of bitter pits. Cyanide, impossible to be sure on damp grass. Yet the notion dug talons into her brain. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, jabbed an epinephrine auto-injector, started oxygen, and whisked Grant away. Festival security cordoned the pavilion. Reporters smelled a career-making scoop. The whispered verdict travelled faster than cell signals. The bee had killed the judge. Mara stood alone by a toppled barrel, adrenaline slowly seeping away, replaced by dread. She knew many people considered bees either cute or dangerous, but rarely neutral. A fatal sting at a cider contest featuring honey-infused entries? The optics could smash her livelihood. She bent to examine the dead bee. It was indeed one of hers. She recognized the emerald-tinted tag glued to the thorax. But why had a normally docile forager attacked a stationary human in broad daylight? She sniffed the crushed body. The usual pheromones were present, but another scent clung to its legs. Acetone and something sweet. Someone had tampered with the bee. Mabel Truitt approached, face drained. "Mara, the sheriff's here. They want to ask about your hives." "Of course," Mara said, mind racing. Sheriff Clayton was a tall man with an apologetic manner, as though law enforcement interrupted more pleasant hobbies. He took Mara aside while deputies photographed the pavilion. "Mrs. Velasquez." "Ms.," she corrected automatically. "Right, Ms. Velasquez. Witnesses say the bee came from your observation hive near the tasting tables." "The hive was sealed except for a narrow vent," Mara said. "One stray forager might have escaped, but bees don't attack unless provoked. Something attracted it to Mr. Grant specifically." Clayton lifted a brow. "You suggesting deliberate weaponization of a bee?" "I'm suggesting the sting might not be the main problem. Judge Grant's reaction looked too rapid, even for allergy, and I smelled cyanide. Hospital toxicology will tell. Meanwhile, I have to secure potential evidence. We'll need to inspect your hives." Mara nodded. "I'll show you, but please handle frames gently." The sheriff accompanied her to the mesh observation box. Examination revealed no breaches, except a tiny smear of clear gel near the vent hole. Mara dabbed it with a gloved finger and lifted it to her nose. A synthetic imitation of queen mandibular pheromone, the chemical that could send workers into agitation. Someone had lured a bee out, made it aggressive, and guided it toward Grant. But how had they ensured it would sting him and no one else? And why poison him too? By dusk, rumors thickened like orchard fog. Grant was in critical condition. Grant was already dead. The festival was cancelled. All honey products were contaminated. Vendors packed early. Contestants loaded crates into trucks with stony faces. Mara drove her battered pickup to the far edge of the orchard, where Boss Celeste Bonnet waited outside the barn. "They've quarantined our cider," Celeste said, voice trembling. "If the judge dies, we're finished." "He was poisoned," Mara replied. "The bee was only cover." Celeste hugged herself. "Can you prove it?" "I plan to try." Mara's gaze travelled down the rows of trees glowing copper in waning light. Somebody here cares more about that contract than a human life. Later that night, Mara sat at her kitchen table with field notes and a cup of chamomile sweetened by her bee's spring batch. She sketched possibilities. To frame the bees, the saboteur needed 3 elements: queen pheromone to provoke aggression, access to Mara's tagged hives, and confidence that the bee would find Grant. Cider judges leaned close to glasses, inhaling aroma. If his scarf or collar were laced with pheromone, the bee would zero in on him. And the poison, where was it delivered? Water glass? Bottle? Cup? Paramedics had removed everything from scene. Evidence would be at the sheriff's station. She'd have to investigate another angle. One contender remained vivid in memory: Callista Quinlan. While everyone else used clear or cork-sealed bottles, she'd kept hers in a cooler, aggressively protected. Newcomer status made her an outsider, with everything to gain, nothing to lose. But suspicion alone was flimsy. Mara pulled on a jacket and grabbed a red lens flashlight. The festival grounds were closed, but the cidery barns were never truly locked. Fermenting tanks needed checking, and farmers held a gentleman's agreement about after-hours access. Mara trusted bees and hunches. She parked outside the Templeton barn first. Dylan Templeton was inside, siphoning cider into oak casks. He jumped when Mara appeared. "Whoa, sneaking around," he said. "Could ask you the same." He sighed. "Grandad's batch started re-fermenting. Got to rack it off the lees or it'll sour." Mara looked at his smudged overalls and anxiety-ringed eyes. Not a murderer's vibe, unless guilt was fermenting too. "Did you notice anything odd today?" she asked. "Besides a bee assassination. Ivy and Pete nearly punched each other behind the carousel. Something about stolen apples." Interesting, but Mara doubted either possessed the subtlety for a pheromone plus poison scheme. She drove next to the communal cold room, where samples waited for official analysis. Light glowed under the door. The padlock hung open. Inside, Callista Quinlan knelt beside a wire shelf, transferring liquid from a brown bottle into a small vial. "You have some explaining to do," Mara said. Callista jolted, dropping the vial, which cracked on the concrete. The air blossomed with bitter almond. Mara's stomach flipped. "That's apricot kernel extract, isn't it? Concentrated amygdalin." Callista straightened, composure sliding into place like a mask. "Yes, but it's not what you think. Looks like cyanogenic compound to me. This is heritage flavoring. My family's Basque cider uses a dash of bitter kernel tincture. Perfectly safe when microdosed. Safe for taste, lethal if you adjust the dial. And the judge collapsed after drinking water. Clear might disguise almond notes better than cider." Callista's eyes narrowed. "You insinuating I poisoned him? Convince me you didn't." She exhaled shakily. "Grant requested private samples last night. He wanted each of us to sweeten a small batch with our signature adjunct: honey from you, spice blend from Pete, barrel scrapings from Templeton, and tincture from me. He said he was conducting a side experiment." Mara frowned. "That wasn't on the program." "Exactly. He swore it wouldn't affect the main judging, but offered advance publicity if we cooperated." Callista lifted a folded paper from her coat, a non-disclosure agreement bearing Grant's signature. Mara scanned it. The language was vague, but echoed Callista's story. So Grant had separate little bottles hidden somewhere. Callista nodded. "Mine are still sealed in the cooler. You can test them." Mara considered. If Grant had handled multiple secret mixtures, cross-contamination was conceivable. Maybe he spilled Callista's tincture on his collar, explaining both cyanide odor and bee attraction, if the tincture contained almond oil carrying traces of isoamyl acetate, similar to alarm pheromone. But queen pheromone had lured the bee, not alarm. "Did Grant ask for anything from my hives?" Mara asked. "Only raw comb. Said he wanted to study flavor carryover. I saw him with a small tube of gel. Claimed it preserved aroma." Mara's pulse quickened. Queen pheromone gel. "I don't know. He said a lab in Portland sent it." If Grant dabbed pheromone on his scarf while handling the comb, that alone could draw a bee. Combine that with accidental skin exposure to cyanogenic tincture, then water to rinse his mouth. She pictured the chain reaction: Pheromone invites bee. Bee stings at same spot where toxin was absorbed. Histamine response magnifies absorption. Collapse. Almost tragic coincidence. But coincidence wouldn't explain why pheromone gel ended up on the observation hive vent, nor why someone smeared it there after the sting, as though to direct suspicion at Mara's bees. That was deliberate. "Callista," Mara said quietly, "someone's trying to frame both of us." Callista's confident posture wilted. Who? Mara imagined motives. Ivy Barclay's orchard oversaw by far the largest acreage. Losing the state contract would cost her hundreds of thousands. But Ivy hadn't gone near the observation hive. Pete Farrow. Broke but cunning. Yet the smear on the hive suggested knowledge of bees. Mara thought of Dylan Templeton's jittery nerves, his late-night siphoning. Templeton's aged cider in bourbon barrels that once held honey liqueur. Dylan, apprentice chemist at community college, would understand pheromones. But Templeton's already sold plenty. They weren't desperate. Then she remembered Celeste's offhand comment weeks ago. If we don't win, we'll have to sell to Barclay. Bankruptcy threatened Bonnet Hill too. Celeste didn't handle bees, though. Who else had ready access to hives? Mara herself earlier noticed a new seasonal worker, Leon, always asking questions about tagging. He claimed interest in beekeeping. Mara turned back to Callista. "We need Sheriff Clayton to hear your story and that NDA, and we need to find Leon." They drove to the sheriff's office. Clayton emerged from a back room, tie loosened. He looked exhausted but interested when Mara explained. "The hospital reports cyanide compounds in Grant's blood," he confirmed. "They pumped him in time. He'll recover, but slowly. If accidental, criminal negligence still stands." Callista produced the NDA and her sealed tincture bottles. A deputy took them for lab analysis. Clayton spread crime scene photos on the desk. Frame 11 showed Leon, yellow festival badge, arms raised, cheering the cider pour, standing directly behind the observation hive. Mara pointed him out. "He joined Bonnet Hill last month," she said. "Claimed to be backpacking the region." Clayton tapped his pen. "Address on his employment form was a motel. We'll check." An hour later, deputies reported Leon's room vacated, rental car gone. Surveillance from a gas station 20 miles south showed him headed toward the interstate. A bolo went out. Celeste arrived after midnight, eyes red from crying. Mara filled her in while Clayton stepped away. Celeste's face contorted. "Leon asked to shadow you yesterday, remember? Said he admired your queen-rearing method. I thought it flattering." "Did he ever go near the fermentation shed?" Mara asked. "He helped bottle this week." Mara's chest tightened. "If our batch contains traces of pheromone gel or cyanide, we're sunk." The lab worked overnight. At dawn, results returned. Bonnet Hill's contest bottles were clean. However, a separate case of unlabeled reserve cider found in Celeste's barn tested positive for low but detectable amygdalin and synthetic pheromone. Celeste blanched. "I've never seen those bottles." "Planted," Mara said. "To be discovered later as proof we sabotaged the judge." Mara walked the rows alone, bees beginning morning flights. Sunlight lanced through branches heavy with fruit. She loved this place fiercely and refused to let sabotage ruin it. Her phone rang, Sheriff Clayton. Leon's real name was J. Leon Barker, ex-employee of Barclay Orchards, fired last winter for theft of fermentation yeast starter. He had a history of petty revenge. Deputies intercepted him at the state line, trunk loaded with empty pheromone tubes, apricot kernels, and forged Bonnet Hill labels. By midday, news spread. Attempted poisoning suspect in custody. Judge expected to recover. Harvest festival would resume next weekend. Reporters pivoted from killer bees to corporate espionage. Mara's hives, once villains, became celebrities. But Mara still puzzled over motive. Berkeley Orchards stood to benefit if Bonnet Hill were disqualified, but Ivy Berkeley hiring a disgruntled ex-worker seemed too convenient. She confronted Ivy at the reopened market the following week. "Did you pay Leon Barker to sabotage us?" Mara asked quietly. Ivy's face flushed crimson. "Absolutely not. That idiot stole a mother yeast I'd spent years cultivating. When I pressed charges, he threatened me. I warned every orchard in the county not to hire him." Mara believed her, which meant Leon acted alone, revenge broadening into chaos. Yet why target Grant rather than Ivy? Perhaps because Bonnet Hill had given him employment after Berkeley blacklisted him. His twisted logic blamed them too. Judge Grant returned on crutches for the festival's final day, neck still bandaged but humour intact. He insisted on completing the scoring from earlier. A hush fell as he cleared his throat. "Despite unusual circumstances," he said, "I finished my notes before the incident. The winner of the 37th harvest contest is Bonnet Hill Orchards." Cheers exploded. Celeste wept into Mara's shoulder. Mara's bees swirled overhead, indifferent yet somehow celebratory. Grant approached Mara afterward. "I owe you an apology," he said. "My private experiment endangered everyone." Mara shook her head. "You couldn't foresee sabotage. But next time, warn the beekeepers when you play with pheromones." He smiled ruefully. Lesson learned. That evening, beneath lanterns strung between apple trunks, cider flowed freely. Competitors toasted each other. Even Ivy raised a glass to Bonnet Hill. Mara slipped away to the hives, veil pushed back. Bees crawled over her fingers, their delicate legs tickling like secrets. Celeste found her there. "We did it," she whispered. "You did," Mara corrected. "I just kept bees from taking the fall." "Still planning that thesis?" Celeste asked. Mara gazed toward the cider barn, where bottles labelled with her wax seal bee logo awaited shipment statewide. "Maybe I've already written it," she said. "An empirical study on how truth, like honey, always finds its way out, drop by drop." A gentle wind rustled leaves. The orchard, cleansed of intrigue, settled into twilight hum. Somewhere a worker uncorked another bottle, and laughter floated across the rows. Mara breathed in the mingled scents of apple skin, fermenting sugars, and the warm, complex note of hive resin, a reminder that the sweetest things in life were born of cooperation, not war. The bees, the trees, the people, all parts of one fragile ecosystem, easy to disrupt, worth every effort to protect. She closed the hive door, satisfied. The secret recipe war had ended not with victors and spoils, but with community restored, cider saved, and the quiet assurance that vigilance and a beekeeper's patience could outmatch sabotage any day.